Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you fall asleep with these road trip horror stories. So before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video Idel. Hope to know where you're from and what time you're watching this. So leave in the comments when you're ready to get comfortable and relax. I grew up in Hampshire, a charming little town in England where life moved at a gentle pace. The crime rate was nearly non-existent, and nothing particularly remarkable ever occurred. It was during this time, when I was just 10 years old, that I lived in a modest home with my parents and younger brother. Close by resided an intriguing figure who captured the attention of the entire village, Mrs. Margarita. In her 70s, she inhabited an aged wooden house alongside her young granddaughter, a girl who must have been. She was nearly my age at the time, yet no one had ever laid eyes on her. It was only known that she was present, her silhouette visible through the window as she sat at the table with her grandmother or rocked in a small chair that Mrs. Margarita apparently had in the living room. Occasionally, laughter and conversation could be heard between them, with her grandmother singing lullabies at night. However, for some reason, Margarita never allowed her to leave the house, and the girl didn't even attend school. She had no interaction with any child in the town and lived entirely alone in that old little house, surrounded by a high fence that was also wooden but in a state of disrepair. This piqued the interest of the neighbors, particularly the children, who were filled with curiosity about the girl and her reasons for never leaving. I recall how we would often, and in secret from our parents, creep up to the fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of her through the windows, but all that could be seen was her silhouette, while the adults labeled the woman a bad mother for keeping her daughter confined, away from the other children. It appeared as if the girl was never allowed to bask in the sunlight. Yet, the reasons behind Margarita's decision to keep her granddaughter hidden remained a mystery. Though whispers of suspicion circulated, it was revealed that nearly a decade prior, Mrs. Margarita had endured a devastating tragedy, a catastrophic forest fire that ravaged the town, obliterating homes and taking lives. Several neighbors were involved in the tragic events, including Mrs. Margarita's son and his wife, the girl's parents. The neighbors reported that they did everything possible to rescue them, but it proved futile. Everyone was literally fleeing for their lives, and nothing could be done. Nevertheless, the woman persisted, determined to enter the burning house, and no one could deter her. Although she was unable to save her son and daughter-in-law, she did succeed in rescuing her little granddaughter, who was inside at the time. At just 6 months old, many claim it was a true miracle that the girl survived. Following that incident, Margarita became inseparable from the baby, refusing to let anyone else see her. This led to the belief that the girl's reluctance to leave her grandmother's house stemmed from the severe burn she endured in that horrific fire, which left deep scars on her body. Perhaps she feared the judgment of other children and their potential mockery. Speculation surrounding this situation was abundant. This sparked an ever-growing curiosity among the children, my friends, and I turned it into a challenge to uncover the identity of Mrs. Margarita's granddaughter. In our town, one of our favorite pastimes was camping outside our homes. The area was so peaceful, with no crime or danger to worry about, that our parents encouraged it. We would set up makeshift camps wherever we pleased and spend several nights there until we grew tired of the spot and sought out a new one. It was one of those nights when my brother, my friends, and I began to craft a plan to finally solve the enigma of the captive girl. After hours of brainstorming various wild ideas, as was typical for our age, we opted for the most daring option, believing it would lead us to the truth. I recall that night vividly. We gathered with my friends and erected a makeshift tent on the edge of Mrs. Margarita's old house, one of the many legends we had spun ourselves. Surrounding the old woman was a reputation of being an evil witch, rumored to keep her granddaughter captive for the purpose of practicing her sinister spells. We had no evidence to support this, but what did a 10-year-old need in terms of proof? To us, it was an undeniable truth. She was a reclusive figure, rarely engaging with anyone, which made it all too easy to conjure up wild imaginations about her. While this fueled our excitement, It also instilled a deep fear of failure, worried that Margarita might cast a spell on us or something even more dreadful. Yet, despite our trepidation, the decision was made, and the plan was set in motion. Underway, our plan was to wait for the woman to leave the house for her daily shopping at the town market. At that moment, a group of us would slip inside through a small hatch in the back door. Once inside, we would search for the girl and rescue her from the grasp of her wicked witch grandmother. Just as we had anticipated, the old woman departed early with her shopping basket. Once we confirmed she was a safe distance away, a group, including myself, entered the old house. Stepping into Margarita's home it felt like embarking on a journey into the unfamiliar, where my senses were heightened to every detail around me. The initial surprise came not from the sights, but from the overwhelming scent that filled the air, a strong, musty odor of mold and aged wood, distinctly unpleasant and hard to articulate. In the living room, remnants of a young girl's presence were scattered about. Dolls, hair ties, and a small rocking chair that seemed to cradle memories of her gentle movements, visible through the window. Margarita's modest home contained just 2 rooms, making it easy to locate the girl's room. However, none of us were ready for the sight that awaited us when we opened that door. As I mentioned earlier, Margarita's granddaughter was estimated to be around 10 years old at that time. Yet, in the room, aside from dolls and stuffed animals, there was only a small crib, far too small for a girl of her age to sleep in. We were all left bewildered, searching for an explanation. We searched for an explanation, but found nothing that could justify our feelings. That's why we ventured to the crib to uncover its secrets. Upon entering, we were met with an overwhelming sight. In the center lay a small, completely charred body wrapped in a wool blanket. The shock was so profound that we all screamed in terror, drawing the attention of our neighbors. When they arrived, they were equally horrified by the chilling scene before them. My mother quickly took my brother and me by the arm and led us away. Out of the house, they quickly called the police, who took Margarita away. After a psychological evaluation, she was referred to a mental health center. However, the story doesn't end there. It appears my friends and I were not entirely mistaken in our suspicions about the woman. When the police searched the house, they made several deeply unsettling discoveries. They found a secret room filled with books on occultism and black magic, along with a notebook brimming with bizarre symbols and drawings that seemed to be in the midst of a religious ritual. It appears that following the tragic loss of her son and daughter-in-law, Margarita managed to recover her granddaughter's body, only to find that she was no longer alive, contrary to what was believed. The poor woman was deeply distressed after the incident, and evidence found in her home suggests that she attempted to resurrect her granddaughter through black magic. In her grief-stricken state, she even crafted a 4-foot rag doll, which she presented as her granddaughter and treated with utmost care. This was the peculiar situation we encountered. She would often gaze through the window from her small rocking chair, where her grandmother would engage in conversation, sing songs, and share laughter. Yet, the identity of the other voice, accompanied by the sound of childish laughter echoing within the house, remained a mystery. Given her grandmother's mental state, many speculated that it was she who mimicked a girl's voice, pretending it was her granddaughter speaking to her. Others held the belief that the spirit of a little girl truly resided in her grandmother's old home, providing her with companionship. The company remains an enigma, as Margarita fell silent following her hospitalization. After 2 years in the mental sanatorium, she succumbed to a stroke. My upbringing took place in a quaint Virginia town, just a stone's throw from Washington, D.C. This area was once a serene haven, predominantly inhabited by retirees seeking tranquility, resulting in a scarcity of playmates. In fact, I was the sole child on my street, which made my time at school all the more cherished. Yet, fortune had its own plans for me. Everything shifted when I was 8, the day the Lopez family moved in next door. They were a married couple of Mexican descent with 2 kids, Fabio, who was 8, and Marcela, who was 7. From the moment they arrived, those children became my closest friends. Every afternoon, we would venture out to play for hours, and often my mom would bake cookies and serve us milk before they headed back home. However, it seemed that life in the Lopez household was far from peaceful. Mr. Ernesto, the children's father, had a volatile temperament and was prone to outbursts. The evident struggles with alcohol led to frequent outbursts directed at them and their mother. The arguments were relentless, and on numerous occasions, the sounds of blows and cries filled the air. However, there was one night that stood out as particularly horrifying. On one of those many evenings when Mr. Lopez returned home inebriated, a fight erupted, culminating in a shotgun blast followed by frantic screams. This alarming situation prompted my parents and other neighbors, gripped by fear, to approach the house to uncover the truth. After persistent knocking, they finally managed to get the door opened. Mrs. Marta peered through the partially opened door, her expression a mix of fear and anxiety. Her voice trembled as she spoke, revealing her unease. When the neighbors inquired about the gunshot, she hastily insisted it was merely an accident. Her husband had been cleaning the weapon when it discharged unexpectedly. She reassured them that it was just a scare and that everyone was all right. However, her explanation failed to convince anyone. Concerned, the neighbors offered their assistance and suggested calling the police, but she shook her head almost frantically, insisting that everything was fine. The next day, the Lopez children went out to play as usual, riding bikes all over the neighborhood. However, I noticed bruises on Fabio's arms, as well as on Marcellus. With the recklessness typical of 8-year-olds, I asked them directly if their father hit them. At that moment, they exchanged alarmed glances and fell silent. Undeterred, I told them that was what everyone thought. Hearing this, they halted bikes and informed me they needed to head home. At that moment, I couldn't grasp the sudden shift in their demeanor. I pointed out that it was hardly mid-afternoon, yet they insisted on returning and made their way back to their house. I recall that day was Saturday, Mr. Lopez's preferred day for revelry with friends, and also one of the days when tensions often escalated in that household. However, that morning was devoid of disputes or sounds of violence against the walls, which struck us as odd but fortunate. The following day, the Lopez children, they didn't go out to play as they usually did. Their mother rarely left the house. Later, we discovered the reason behind it. That Saturday, Mrs. Marta seized the opportunity of her husband's absence to flee with her 2 children to another city. I felt a deep sadness upon hearing the news, knowing I would never see my friends again. Yet, there was also a sense of relief, knowing they would no longer endure their father's mistreatment. Following that event, Mr. Lopez's life changed drastically. He began to drink heavily, ultimately leading to his downfall. His job and meandering through the neighborhood, inebriated and unkempt. He was nearly homeless until a year later when he took his own life in that house. An outcome that shocked no one. Following Mr. Lopez's death, the house stood empty for 12 years until a foundation purchased it to construct a nursing home. However, when excavation commenced, a grim discovery was made in the back garden: the remains of a woman and 2 children. It didn't take much investigation to ascertain that it was Mrs. Martha and her children. Her 2 children, my childhood friends, sparked a significant uproar in the community when their discovery was made. A subsequent forensic analysis disclosed that their necks had been cut, likely while they slept, as they were still clad in their pajamas. It became evident why there had been no sound on that ominous night. Back in 2014, when I was 16, new neighbors moved into the house across the street. Anna and Arthur Moore, a middle-aged married couple without children, were strikingly attractive and financially well off, yet there was something unsettling about them. There was an unusual presence surrounding them, a sort of shadowy energy that I could sense, particularly in Anna. From a very first moment, I laid eyes on this couple. An intense curiosity sparked within me. They appeared almost too perfect, like a pair of 30-somethings straight out of a Gothic fairy tale. Yet, my instincts quickly raised alarms, and they have never steered me wrong. I sensed something off about them and resolved to uncover the truth. Even if I'm not entirely proud to admit it, I found myself observing them from my bedroom. From the window, a privileged view of their house unfolded, revealing a good portion of the living room and the expansive kitchen. I also caught sight of the main room and a large part of the garden. It felt like the perfect moment to dust off the old binoculars that Santa gifted me when I was 8. At first, everything appeared quite normal. Their daily routines mirrored those of any couple. Arthur would rise early to jog each morning, returning to shower, and I assumed he would have breakfast in the kitchen with Anna before heading off to his day. Anna, on the other hand, didn't appear to have a job, as she was almost always at home. The first 2 weeks passed with total normality, with nothing extraordinary to report. However, one day I began to notice something quite strange. Anna Moore left the house early, and when she returned, I saw her carrying some supermarket bags. Aside from this, I noticed 2 somewhat unusual purchases. One in particular caught my attention. Anna opened a suitcase and took out a large number of bags, whose origin I recognized immediately, as they were from a well-known textile store. In the city, there's a store where my mother would always go to buy materials whenever I had a school play or similar events. You might be curious about what's so unusual about that. The oddity lies in the fact that she would purchase meters and meters of black velvet along with thick cords of the same hue. But that's not all. Among her supermarket finds were 2 large boxes of black candles and 2 additional boxes that seemed to contain incense. Yet, the most unsettling part was what Anna acquired last. From the car emerged a large box, swathed in a heavy sheet that suggested its weight. She set it down momentarily, and to her surprise, it began to shift. I jumped, caught off guard. If the box was moving, it implied that something within was alive. This revelation was unsettling, yet marked only the onset of a series of bizarre occurrences. Later that afternoon, a sleek van pulled up outside the Moore residence, and 2 impeccably dressed men stepped out, bearing what looked like a bag of dog food, yet I never spotted any dog in that house. After a few minutes, the men departed, carrying the velvet bags and cords. For a brief moment, I thought they might have placed the box containing whatever was moving into the car, but that didn't occur. They simply loaded the bags and left. A few days later, specifically on Sunday of that same week, a cluster of cars gathered in front of the Moore's house. It appeared to be some sort of meeting with around 15 people dispersed across several vehicles, including the men I had previously seen. The other day, a group arrived carrying several bags filled with what looked like long black suits, or perhaps tunics. Observing this, I couldn't help but hope it was a themed gathering, perhaps with a Gothic flair. However, there was no music or any hint of festivity. It felt more like a somber affair. It became evident that the Moores were associated with some sort of cult tied to the occult, though I couldn't pinpoint whether it leaned towards Satanism or witchcraft. The eeriest moment occurred later, around 1 o'clock in the morning, when chants began to echo through the air. Unusual sounds started to emanate from that house, barely audible, almost like whispers, making it likely that no one else detected them. What stood out distinctly was a noise reminiscent of a goat's bleating, or so it appeared to me. The first thought that crossed my mind was of the large box that was shifting. The vision of that small creature being sacrificed sent chills down my spine and shattered my heart simultaneously. That night, I was wide awake, acutely aware of the events unfolding in the Moore's house, rendering sleep impossible. As the night wore on, I found myself observing the aftermath of that dismal meeting around 5 in the morning. Just as dawn began to break, one by one, the guests started to depart, and I noticed them loading several black garbage bags into the trunks of their cars. This peculiar sight piqued my curiosity. I had immersed myself in the role of an amateur sleuth, and what began as a playful endeavor soon transformed into an exhilarating quest to uncover the hidden truths of my neighbors. I felt like the lead character in a gripping mystery, yet there were moments when the thrill took an unexpected turn, when reality surpasses imagination. The following weeks and months unfolded in a way that felt almost surreal. The Moore's ritual Sundays became common knowledge. and it seemed the entire neighborhood was aware of their connections to the occult. Though no one openly discussed it, many harbored suspicions that Anna was involved in something otherworldly. As their hidden lives became public, my curiosity waned, and I found myself no longer inclined to observe them. There was little intrigue left in what had once been a mystery. It was no longer a mystery to unravel. However, a couple of years later, a chilling event unfolded that sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood, drawing everyone's focus back to the moors. One morning, around 5, the desperate cries for help from a man pierced the stillness. My parents leaped out of bed and rushed into the street to discover the source of the commotion. As they hurried toward the sound, they realized the screams were emanating from the Moore's house, prompting them and other neighbors to race there. I attempted to follow in their wake. My mother intervened, concerned for my safety, so I remained on the porch, anxiously awaiting their return. Suddenly, 2 police cars and an ambulance pulled up, and I sensed the gravity of the situation. That morning, Anna, overtaken by a spirit, had stabbed her husband twice in the chest while he slept. Thankfully, Arthur's injuries were not life-threatening, and he was released from the hospital a few days later. Meanwhile, Anna was taken into custody. What I discovered from her was that she had been compelled to seek psychiatric treatment. The Moores never returned to their home following this event, leaving it vacant for a period until it was purchased by a Christian family. Interestingly, I never heard from them again. About a decade ago, I relocated to a charming neighborhood in San Francisco, a place filled with joy where everyone was familiar with one another, creating a wonderfully positive atmosphere. From the instant I arrived, I sensed that in this neighborhood there were certain individuals who embodied the essence of the community, well known and cherished by all. Among them was Mrs. Amelia, a delightful elderly woman who tended to her plants each morning. As she watered them, she transformed the moment into a lively performance, often sharing a humorous verse with anyone who happened to stroll by. She truly added a unique charm to the neighborhood, and everyone held her in great affection. Another notable figure was Nicolo, an Italian proprietor of the most popular cafe in the area. It was no wonder, as he crafted the most delightful treats that drew in the crowds. The most delightful bread you could ever imagine. And he was undeniably a charming individual with a wonderful sense of humor. Yet, the most vivid character in the neighborhood was Frank, a man in his 60s who had dedicated over 30 years to teaching art at the local school. He was well known for his significant contributions to culture and for transforming his home into an open-air museum on special occasions. For instance, on Independence Day, he would create a display in his front yard featuring plaster sculptures of his own making, and he did the same for Easter as well. During Christmas, there was no question that what truly captivated him was his Halloween tradition. Each year, as the season approached, Old Frank, known for his eccentricities, transformed his garden into a haunting spectacle. He would erect a massive, eerie Grim Reaper, scythe raised high, right in the center. What made the scene even more unsettling were the faceless ragdolls, dressed in tattered clothes, hanging around him like ghastly figures, evoking the chilling illusion of hanged children. It was a sight that was more than just terrifying. It was unforgettable. It was quite unsettling the first time I encountered it. It evoked a peculiar feeling within me. However, Frank took the time to clarify that this was an artistic depiction symbolizing the world's cruelty towards children. Each doll signifies a child who fell victim to humanity's malevolence, their lives tragically cut short. The image of the parka lurking nearby only intensified the impact. After hearing Frank's insights, I grasped a bit more of his intent, yet the disturbing nature of it remained unchanged, as it was, after all, a harsh reality. Everyone who passed by would interpret it similarly, and I couldn't shake off a sense of suspicion. Having watched countless mystery thrillers and crime series, I couldn't help but consider that something far more sinister might be lurking beneath the surface. As he resembled a kind of African-American Santa Claus, always ready with sweets and handmade toys and dolls. He used to offer private plastic arts classes to children at his home, which caused me some concern. One day, an incident occurred that alarmed everyone. One of the neighborhood children had vanished, leaving his mother in total despair. And we were all deeply affected by the situation. The little boy had left his house early on his way to school, just a few blocks away, but he never made it. His mother quickly called the police, and the search for the boy commenced. We all volunteered to help find him, and including Frank, who appeared genuinely concerned as the little boy was also his student. I couldn't shake a feeling of suspicion. I had no real reason to doubt Frank, but my past haunted me. As a child, I endured an attempted abuse by a neighbor and family friend, a traumatic experience that left me deeply distrustful. So, when I witnessed the unsettling portrayal Frank created for Halloween, I couldn't help but wonder if it revealed a glimpse of his darker nature, reminiscent of that neighbor from my past. As a child, I found myself engulfed in a whirlwind of thoughts when faced with the threat of harm. Hours slipped by, and the 9-year-old boy remained missing. Panic began to seep into the atmosphere, and my restlessness grew. My gaze was fixated on old Frank, desperately seeking any sign that he was involved. After what felt like an eternity without answers, I could no longer hold back. I approached one of the police officers and shared my suspicions, hoping for a listening ear. He inquired whether I was certain about my statements, and I clearly responded with a no, as I lacked any evidence. However, I recounted his actions with the dolls on Halloween and shared my thoughts on the matter. Moments later, the police requested permission to search the houses, claiming that the little boy might still be in the vicinity. Although my neighbors exchanged glances, they all consented, including Frank. Yet, I couldn't tell if it was due to the persistent gaze I unknowingly directed at him, or because he noticed me conversing with the police. Or perhaps it was the instinct of a seasoned individual when the officers requested to search his home. Frank's eyes darted towards me, filled with an accusatory glare that sent a wave of unease through me for a fleeting moment. Yet, I maintained his gaze, silently conveying my distrust. The police proceeded to comb through his residence meticulously, uncovering nothing but dolls, paintings, puppets, art supplies, and his personal effects. There was no evidence to indicate that the little boy had ever been there, nor any other child for that matter. When the police arrived empty-handed, Frank glanced at me with a look that felt like a slap. I was taken aback. I genuinely believed he had the child or had done something terrible to him. The officers combed through several homes, but found nothing. However, as I was preparing a sandwich later that afternoon, I noticed a patrol car pull up in front of my neighbor's house. To my relief, her son emerged from it, safe and sound. Ultimately, it turned out that the little boy had intentionally skipped school and had gone off with a friend. A group of friends and I headed to a skateboarding competition in a different neighborhood when I discovered that the little boy was safe. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a profound sense of shame. I couldn't fathom how I would face Frank after everything that had happened. In that moment, all I wanted was to gather my belongings and disappear from that place forever. However, the next day brought an unexpected visitor. It was Frank. As I peered through the peephole and confirmed his identity, I hesitated about whether to open the door, but ultimately I did. Ultimately, one must own up to their mistakes. So I welcomed him in and offered a cup of coffee. We engaged in a lengthy conversation, during which I sincerely apologized, and fortunately, he accepted my apologies. As we talked, I shared my thoughts and personal experiences. Gradually, as I listened to his stories and learned more about him, I recognized the biases I had held and how unfairly I had judged him without cause. Over time, it became clear to me that old Frank was indeed a genuinely good person. Everyone said he was, and to this day, we remain good friends. Diego and I lived in a middle-class neighborhood. He was my neighbor and my best friend since kindergarten. There was nothing one didn't know about the other, or so I thought. Diego was quite handsome and well-off, so it was no surprise that all the girls went crazy for him. Whenever we went out together, I felt at a disadvantage because he always stole all the attention, and I was relegated to being the friend of the handsome guy. However, he was always quite reserved. He was conservative and quite serious regarding relationships, possessing all the traits of a womanizer. Yet he leaned more towards the romantic side, valuing genuine connections and stable partnerships. I often teased him about this, joking that he resembled a Disney princess trapped in Tom Cruise's body, given his slight resemblance to the actor. Despite having dated several girls, there was one who captured his heart from the very first moment. Barbara Estrada, a tall, stunning blonde who was our classmate in high school. She was unaware, but Diego had always harbored feelings for her. Unfortunately, he never found the courage to express them, especially since she was involved with another boy, Hector, the star of the wrestling team and quite the bully. Initially, I urged him to make a move on Barbara in an attempt to win her heart, but then I recalled her current relationship and recognized it wasn't the wisest course of action. Yet, as the saying goes, timing is everything. In this instance, however, it felt more like mischief was at play, orchestrating events in a rather unexpected way. A few years later, while Diego was immersed in his medical studies, he would encounter Barbara once more. This reunion took place one night when we decided to enjoy ourselves after a long period of separation, each engrossed in our respective university degrees, Diego in medicine and I in law. Nevertheless, we occasionally carved out time to reconnect and relive the memories of our past. It was during one of those nights that we crossed paths with Barbara, who was celebrating with a group of friends at the same venue, all of them already in their 20s, while Diego was not yet there, as reserved as he had been during his high school years. A few drinks transformed him into someone bolder. This time, he didn't just admire her from distance. He took the plunge and approached her. They struck up a conversation and soon found themselves dancing. Meanwhile, I didn't hold back either and began to flirt with one of her friends. From that moment on, Diego and Barbara began dating, embarking on a relationship that radiated joy. I had never witnessed Diego so genuinely happy with anyone before, and that brought me joy as well. He was utterly smitten, and it seemed she felt the same. They truly were the perfect couple. Everyone envied him, but soon everything would change dramatically. Diego, a hopeless romantic, had been dating Barbara for just 8 months when he decided to throw her a surprise party at his parents' house, where he proposed. I was completely frozen as I watched him kneel and present her with the ring, especially since he hadn't mentioned a word to me beforehand, probably knowing I would have tried to talk him out of it. It all felt too rushed to me, even though I was certain he was deeply in love with her. If only he had waited. For years, I found myself uncertain about Barbara's feelings. It felt premature to determine if she truly loved him in the same way he loved her, or if she was genuinely ready to build a life together. However, the reality was that she accepted his proposal, and they became engaged shortly after the engagement party. Following that, Diego's parents relocated, leaving him the house. As anticipated, it wasn't long before he invited Barbara to move in with him. I must admit, I was conflicted about it. They were both still so young, especially Diego. At 24, I observed that Barbara was just 21, and everything felt hurried. It struck me that this relationship appeared overly convenient for her. From the start, Diego went above and beyond, showering her with lavish gifts, covering her bills, and catering to her every desire. His eagerness to please her seemed extravagant, yet he was utterly captivated by love. Over the next 5 months, their relationship unfolded smoothly, and as they became my neighbors, I found myself seeing them often, though I maintained my distance. In the midst of it all, both of them radiated excitement about the upcoming wedding. Diego was lost in a daydream, envisioning the moment he would marry the love of his life. Meanwhile, Barbara appeared to be consumed by the details: the party, the dress, the guests, and all the elements that come with the ceremony, including the honeymoon. She was in a frenzy, selecting destinations and planning every purchase. While it's common for brides to be enthusiastic about these aspects, there were times when it felt like that was her sole focus. However, things began to unravel shortly thereafter. Months later, when Abraham, Diego's older brother, arrived in town for business and requested to stay at Diego's house. The contrast between the two was striking. Abraham exuded charm, mischief, and charisma, qualities that Diego lacked. He was undeniably handsome and had a reputation as a womanizer. Diego felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of reuniting with his brother after several years apart, especially since Abraham had been living in another city. However, Diego's enthusiasm was tempered by the memory of their past disagreements, largely stemming from Abraham's tendency to meddle in the affairs of others. At that time, we were just a couple of young boys, and I hoped that maturity had transformed him. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. From the moment Diego introduced him to Barbara, I could see the glint of malice in Abraham's eyes. What troubled me even more was that Barbara seemed drawn to him as well. From the outset, something felt off, but I couldn't voice my concerns to Diego. He was utterly oblivious, and I was merely speculating at that point. With only a few months remaining until the wedding, Diego was busy with classes, which kept him away from home for long stretches. In contrast, Barbara had decided to take a break from university to focus entirely on the wedding preparations, spending most of her days at home with Abraham. I hadn't mentioned it to Diego, but for several days, I had been sensing something unusual. It appeared that Barbara and Abraham had developed an unexpectedly close friendship, treating each other as if they were lifelong acquaintances, and it all seemed to happen in an instant. An unsettling bond started to form between them, one that I found deeply troubling. Diego, in his innocence, placed unwavering trust in both his girlfriend and his brother. I felt utterly helpless, as an instinct whispered that this was more than mere friendship. After a few weeks of internal struggle, I finally voiced my concerns, only to be met with unexpected fury from my friend. I had never witnessed such anger in him before. He expressed his frustration with my skepticism towards Barbara, and that was just the beginning. Everything I expressed was utterly nonsensical, driven by my envy of his joy and a desire to tarnish it. He even had the audacity to suggest that I had feelings for his fiancée. The most astonishing part was when he demanded that I distance myself from them and cease all communication with him. He made it clear that he would not tolerate such a vile insinuation about his girl and his brother. I was stunned, unable to grasp the reality of the situation. Yes, it troubled me, but more than anything, I felt a deep sense of pity for him, as I knew him well enough to understand. He found her in a situation that shattered his expectations. It was a moment steeped in irony, as the very act meant to express love turned into a revelation of betrayal. The roses, once a symbol of affection, now felt heavy in his hands, a stark contrast to the joy he intended to bring. As the reality of the scene unfolded before him, the weight of his earlier denial crashed down, leaving him grappling with emotions he never anticipated. What followed was a cascade of events that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives, a twist of fate that no one could have foreseen. He discovered her and his brother asleep in their bed. I didn't need to be present to understand that his heart shattered into countless fragments at that moment, after his world crumbled like that. I imagined the Diego I thought I knew would have confronted them. Perhaps he would have struck his brother and thrown them both out of the house. Naturally, he would have come to my place to share his anguish with me. But to my astonishment, Diego went downstairs in silence, got back into his car, left the house, and returned at the usual time. Upon his arrival, he discovered them engaged in their usual conversation. Barbara greeted him warmly, and the trio shared dinner together, just as they had for several weeks prior. After the meal, he rose from the table, seemingly unfazed. However, before exiting the dining room, he revealed a gun from his pocket and discharged it entirely into the bodies of his girlfriend and brother. He then departed the house, maintaining an air of normalcy, leaned against the tree by the entrance, and lit a cigarette. Home when everything unfolded, and upon hearing the sudden bursts of detonations, I rushed outside to uncover the situation. As I reached the door, I noticed several neighbors had also emerged from their homes, drawn by the sounds. Yet, nothing seemed amiss. Only Diego stood there, casually smoking a cigarette. However, seeing him so composed while Barbara and Abraham were nowhere to be found sent a chill through me. I began to pray fervently, hoping that my fears were unfounded, but my hopes were dashed when I approached him and inquired. When I asked him what had happened, he simply said, "You were right. They were cheating on me." I pressed him further. "And what did you do?" He replied, "I killed them." After that, Diego calmly finished smoking his cigarette and called the police, confessing to the crime and turning himself in. To this day, he remains in prison, serving a 60-year sentence. What disturbs me most about this entire situation, aside from the crime itself, is that I never witnessed him shed a tear. He never collapsed, not even when he was sentenced. He hasn't shown any sign of repentance or suffering to this day, as if he had transformed into someone entirely different, or perhaps that shadowy aspect had always lurked within him. Hidden from my view,